The Salem Witch Trials were a series of hearings and prosecutions of people accused of witchcraft in colonial Massachusetts between February 1692 and May 1693. While witch trials had begun to fade out across much of Europe by the mid-17th century, they continued on the fringes of Europe and in the American colonies. The events in 1692 to 1693 in Salem became a brief outburst of a sort of hysteria in the New World, while the practice was already waning in most of Europe. An overwhelming majority of people accused and convicted of witchcraft were women, about 78%. Overall, the Puritan belief and prevailing New England culture was that women were inherently sinful and more susceptible to damnation than men were. Throughout their daily lives, Puritans, especially Puritan women, actively attempted to thwart attempts by the devil to overtake them and their souls. Indeed, Puritans held the belief that men and women were equal in the eyes of God, but not in the eyes of the devil. Women's souls were seen as unprotected in their weak and vulnerable bodies. Several factors may explain why women were more likely to admit guilt of witchcraft than men. Historian Elizabeth Rice asserts that some likely believed they had truly given in to the devil, and others might have believed they had done so, temporarily. However, because those who confessed were reintegrated into society, some women might have confessed in order to spare their own lives. Quarrels with neighbors often incited witchcraft allegations. One example of this is Abigail Faulkner, who was accused in 1692. Faulkner admitted she was angry at what folks said, and the devil may have temporarily overtaken her, causing harm to her neighbors. Women who did not conform to the norms of Puritan society were more likely to be the target of an accusation, especially those who were unmarried or did not have children. In Salem Village in February 1692, Betty Parris, age 9, and her cousin Abigail Williams, age 11, the daughter and the niece respectively, of Reverend Samuel Parris, began to have fits described as beyond the power of epileptic fits or natural disease to affect, by John Hale, the minister of the nearby town of Beverly. The girls screamed, threw things about the room, uttered strange sounds, crawled under furniture, and contorted themselves into peculiar positions, according to the eyewitness account of Reverend Deodat Lawson, a former minister in Salem Village. The girls complained of being pinched and pricked with pins. A doctor, historically assumed to be William Griggs, could find no physical evidence of any ailment. Other young women in the village began to exhibit similar behaviors. When Lawson preached as a guest in the Salem Village meeting house, he was interrupted several times by the outbursts of the afflicted. The first three people accused and arrested for allegedly afflicting Betty Parris, Abigail Williams, 12-year-old Ann Putnam Jr., and Elizabeth Hubbard, were Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba, with Tituba being the first. Some historians believe that the accusation by Ann Putnam Jr. suggests that a family feud may have been a major cause of the witch trials. At the time, a vicious rivalry was underway between the Putnam and Porter families, one which deeply polarized the people of Salem. Citizens would often have heated debates, which escalated into full-fledged fighting, based solely on their opinion of the feud. Good was a destitute woman accused of witchcraft because of her reputation. At her trial, she was accused of rejecting Puritan ideals of self-control and discipline, when she chose to torment and scorn children instead of leading them towards the path of salvation. Sarah Osborne rarely attended church meetings. She was accused of witchcraft because the Puritans believed that Osborne had her own self-interests in mind following her remarriage to an indentured servant. The citizens of the town disapproved of her trying to control her son's inheritance from her previous marriage. Tituba, an enslaved South American Indian woman from the West Indies, likely became a target because of her ethnic differences from most of the other villagers. She was accused of attracting girls like Abigail Williams and Betty Parris with stories of enchantment from Malleus Maleficarum. These tales about sexual encounters with demons, swaying the minds of men, and fortune-telling were said to stimulate the imaginations of girls and made Tituba an obvious target of accusations. Each of these women was a kind of outcast and exhibited many of the character traits typical of the usual suspects for witchcraft accusations. They were left to defend themselves. Brought before the local magistrates on the complaint of witchcraft, they were interrogated for several days, starting on March 1, 1692, then sent to jail. In March, others were accused of witchcraft, Martha Corey, child Dorothy Good, and Rebecca Nurse in Salem Village, and Rachel Clinton in nearby Ipswich. Martha Corey had expressed skepticism about the credibility of the girls' accusations and thus drawn attention. The charges against her and Rebecca Nurse deeply troubled the community because Martha Corey was a full covenanted member of the church in Salem Village, as was Rebecca Nurse in the church in Salem Town. If such upstanding people could be witches, the townspeople thought, then anybody could be a witch, and church membership was no protection from accusation. Dorothy Good, the daughter of Sarah Good, was only 4 years old but was not exempted from questioning by the magistrates. Her answers were construed as a confession that implicated her mother. In Ipswich, Rachel Clinton was arrested for witchcraft at the end of March on independent charges unrelated to the afflictions of the girls in Salem Village. Sarah Good was tried for witchcraft, and when Good was allowed the chance to defend herself in front of the 12 jurors in the Salem Village meeting house, she argued her innocence, proclaiming Tituba and Osborne as the real witches. In the end, however, Good was convicted of witchcraft and sentenced to death. On July 19, 1692, Sarah Good was hanged along with 4 other women convicted of witchcraft. While the other 4 quietly awaited execution, Good firmly proclaimed her innocence. The Rev. Nicholas Noyes was persistent, but unsuccessful, in his attempts to force Good to confess. When she was found guilty by the judges including Noyes, according to legend she yelled to him, "I'm no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink." Although this sentence does not appear in any of contemporary reports of the execution. There is also a legend that 25 years later, Noyes died from choking on his own blood. Good was pregnant at the time of her arrest and gave birth to an infant in her cell in the jail in Ipswich. The infant died before her mother was hanged. Martha Corey was tried for witchcraft. The Salem community was surprised to see Martha Corey accused, as she was known for her piety and dedicated church attendance, and had been officially admitted to the Salem Village Church in 1691. She had never shown support for the witch trials, since she did not believe witches or warlocks existed. She publicly denounced the witch trials as well as the judges who were involved in the various cases. She was outspoken in her belief that the accusers were lying, and upon hearing this, 2 young girls, Ann Putnam Jr. and Mercy Lewis, promptly accused her of witchcraft. She was unaware of the level of paranoia in the village, and when she went to trial, she was simply truthful about her innocence and never doubted she would be exonerated. As the girls testified against her during examination, Corey asked the judge not to believe the rantings of hysterical children and continued to make similar claims throughout the Salem trials, so this combination made it easy for the afflicted girls to create a story accusing Corey. The girls began mimicking her movements as if they were being controlled by her. Mercy Lewis called out, "There's a man," he whispered in her ear. John Hathorne asked Lewis if the man was Satan, then shortly Ann Putnam Jr. cried out that Martha Corey had a yellow bird sucking on her hand, which was enough evidence to persuade the jury of her guilt. By accusing her, the Putnam family established their power in the town and showed that they would willingly attack anyone who openly doubted their motives and authority. She was hanged on September 22, 1692. She was 72 years old. This accusation represented a turning point in the Salem witch trials, as Corey was a respected member of the church, who had good economic and social standing within the community. After this, accusations escalated across social boundaries, and over 100 women were eventually accused of witchcraft. Her husband, Giles Corey, defended her against the allegations, and in due time he was also accused of witchcraft himself. Giles was so swept up by the trials that he initially believed the accusations against his wife, until he himself was arrested based on the same charge, along with Mary Warren, Abigail Hobbs, and Bridget Bishop. The following day, they were examined by the authorities, during which Abigail Hobbs accused Giles of being a wizard. Corey denied the accusations and refused to plead guilty or not guilty, was sentenced to prison, and subsequently arraigned at the September sitting of the court. According to the law at the time, a person who refused to plead could not be tried. To avoid people cheating justice, the legal remedy for refusing to plead was peine forte et dure. In this process, prisoners were stripped naked, and heavy boards were laid on their bodies. Then rocks or boulders were laid on the plank of wood. This was the process of being pressed. As a result of his refusal to plead, on September 17, Corey was subjected to the procedure by Sheriff George Corwin, but he was steadfast in that refusal, nor did he cry out in pain as the rocks were placed on the boards. After 2 days, Corey was asked 3 times to enter a plea, but each time he replied, "More weight," and the sheriff complied. Occasionally, Corwin would even stand on the stones himself. Robert Kelf, who was a witness along with other townsfolk, later said, in the pressing, Giles Corey's tongue was pressed out of his mouth. The sheriff, with his cane, forced it in again. There are several accounts of Corey's last words. The most commonly told one is that he repeated his request for more weight, as this was how it was dramatized in the Crucible, but it may also have been more rocks. Another telling notes it as, "Damn you, I curse you and Salem." It is unusual for people to refuse to plead, and extremely rare to find reports of people who have been able to endure this painful form of death in silence. Since Corey refused to plead, he died in full possession of his estate, which would otherwise have been forfeited to the government. It passed on to his 2 sons-in-law, in accordance to his will. Salem minister George Burroughs was the only minister executed for witchcraft during the course of the Salem witch trials. He was found guilty based on evidence that included his extraordinary feats of strength, such as lifting a musket by inserting his finger into the barrel, such feats of strength being presumed impossible without diabolical assistance. His failure to baptize his children or to attend communion was also used as evidence of his guilt. He was also suspected of killing his wives by witchcraft, and although witchcraft may not have been involved, he does seem to have treated them badly. Burroughs was hanged at Proctor's Ledge in Salem on August 19, 1692. He was the only minister to have experienced this fate in American history. Although the jury had found no witch's marks on his body, he was nonetheless convicted of witchcraft and a conspiracy with the devil. While standing on a ladder before the crowd, waiting to be hanged, he successfully recited the Lord's Prayer, something that was generally considered by the court of Oyer and Terminer to be impossible for a witch to do. After he was killed, Cotton Mather, a minister from Boston, reminded the crowd from atop his horse that Burroughs had been convicted in a court of law, and spoke convincingly enough that 4 more were executed after Burroughs. Later, the government of the Massachusetts colony recognized Burroughs' innocence and awarded £50 damages to his widow and children, though this led to disputes over the division of the award among his heirs. More than 200 people were accused. 30 were found guilty, 19 of whom were executed by hanging, 14 women and 5 men, and at least 5 people died in jail, including Sarah Osborne. Abigail Faulkner was pregnant when brought to trial, and for this reason, her execution was delayed. In December 1692, 4 months after her arrest, Faulkner petitioned Governor Phipps pleading for clemency. She explained that her husband was an invalid, and though his condition had been stable, her arrest caused him to suffer a relapse, leaving her children with no caretaker, and little or nothing to subsist on. Governor Phipps granted her request. She was pardoned and released from prison. Though released, her name had not been cleared. In 1703, Faulkner petitioned the court asking that she be legally exonerated. Faulkner petitioned the court for 11 years before they finally granted her request, reversing the bill of attainder in 1711. Tituba was the first person to be accused by Elizabeth Parris and Abigail Williams of witchcraft. It has been theorized that Tituba told the girls tales of voodoo and witchcraft prior to the accusations. Tituba was allowed to speak against her accusers despite what race they were, because it was not illegal for slaves to be able to give testimony in court. She was also the first to confess to witchcraft in Salem Village in March 1692. Initially denying her involvement in witchcraft, Tituba later confessed to making a witch cake, due to being beaten by Samuel Parris with the intention of getting a confession. Tituba also confessed to speaking with the devil, and how he told her to worship him, then to hurt the children of the village. When questioned later, she added that she knew about occult techniques from her mistress in Barbados, who taught her how to ward herself from evil powers and how to reveal the cause of witchcraft. Since such knowledge was not meant for harm, Tituba again asserted to Parris she was not a witch, but admitted she had participated in an occult ritual when she made the witch cake in an attempt to help Elizabeth Parris. Tituba was sent to jail in Boston to await trial and punishment on March 7, 1692. Despite these confessions, there is no proof that she did the things to which she confessed. Tituba remained in jail, whose conditions were very poor for 13 months because Samuel Parris refused to pay her jail fees. In April 1693, Tituba was sold to an unknown person for the price of her jail fees. Arrests were made in numerous towns beyond Salem and Salem Village known today as Danvers, notably Andover and Topsfield. The grand juries and trials for this capital crime were conducted by a court of oyer and terminer in 1692 and by a superior court of judicature in 1693, both held in Salem town, where the hangings also took place. It was the deadliest witch hunt in the history of colonial North America. Only 14 other women and 2 men had been executed in Massachusetts and Connecticut during the 17th century. The episode is one of colonial America's most notorious cases of mass hysteria. It has been used in political rhetoric and popular literature as a vivid cautionary tale about the dangers of isolationism, religious extremism, false accusations, and lapses in due process. Thanks for watching. For more videos please click like and subscribe.